The message came 3 days before the trials began. Myra was elbow-deep in the guts of a broken drill press when her communicator buzzed with an urgent transmission from Earth's Interstellar Affairs Office. She wiped the grease from her hands and read the words twice, certain she had misunderstood. She had not misunderstood. Commander Wei, Earth's chosen representative for the Galactic Assessment Trials, had suffered a catastrophic shuttle failure during a routine transport mission. He would survive, but his injuries made competition impossible. Earth needed a replacement, and they needed one now. Myra was not the obvious choice. She was not even the 10th choice, but the trials began in 72 hours, and every qualified candidate was either deployed to distant systems or medically unavailable. Myra had the necessary certifications. She had passed the basic physical requirements during her mandatory service years. Most importantly, she could reach Prime in time. Her father found her packing her small bag that evening. He leaned against the doorframe of her cramped quarters aboard their family mining vessel, the steady hand, and watched her fold her few formal clothes with careful precision. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Someone has to. Someone else could, you could refuse." Myra paused, holding a shirt she had worn exactly once at her brother's wedding ceremony 2 years ago. "They asked me, Papa, Earth asked me. How do I say no to that?" Her father had no answer. He had spent 30 years mining asteroids in the belt, far from Earth and its politics, but even he understood what the coalition meant. Humanity's seat at that table had been earned with blood and sacrifice. To surrender it because no one was willing to try would shame them all. The journey to Prime took 2 days aboard a fast courier ship. Myra spent the time reading everything she could find about the trials, the other species competing, and the history of human participation. The reading did not comfort her. Humans had competed in the Galactic Assessment Trials for 300 years, ever since first contact with the collective. In that time, humanity had produced exactly 4 coalition members. 4 individuals in 3 centuries who had proven themselves worthy of standing alongside the galaxy's finest warriors and strategists. The most recent human success had occurred 47 years ago. The other species viewed humanity with something between pity and contempt. Humans were small. Humans were fragile. Humans lived short lives and possessed no natural weapons, no psionic abilities, no exceptional physical attributes. They had earned their place in the galactic community through sheer stubbornness and surprising technological creativity, but they had never truly impressed anyone. Myra arrived at Prime on the morning of the ranking ceremony. The station was ancient, built by a civilization that had vanished long before any current species had achieved. Its corridors stretched wide enough to accommodate the largest known beings, and its architecture spoke of builders who had thought in centuries rather than years. Myra felt very small walking through those halls. The assessment chamber was a vast circular room with rising tiers of seats surrounding a central platform. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered to witness the ranking of this cycle's candidates. Myra counted 47 beings waiting on the platform, each wearing the ceremonial sash of there. She took her place among them and tried not to stare. They were impossible to ignore. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, their bodies covered in thick gray hide that could deflect blade and beam alike. Their 4 arms ended in hands capable of crushing stone, and their small, deep-set eyes held the patient confidence of apex predators who had never encountered a serious threat. There were strangers still. Their silicon-based bodies shifted and reformed constantly, crystalline structures flowing like water as they adapted to their environment. They communicated through harmonic vibrations that most species could not hear without translator assistance. They moved like shadows given form. Sleek, dark, and graceful, they possessed reflexes that made other species look like they were moving through thick mud. Their ancestors had been ambush predators, and that heritage showed in every fluid motion. Myra stood among these beings and felt the weight of her inadequacy pressing down on her shoulders. She was not tall. She was not strong. She was not fast or psychically gifted or made of living crystal. She was a 28-year-old asteroid miner from a family of asteroid miners, and she had no business being here. The ranking ceremony began with a speech from High Assessor, a elder whose four eyes moved independently as they surveyed the candidates. There were the founders of the coalition, ancient beings who had achieved when humanity's ancestors were still learning to make fire. They administered the trials with cold efficiency and tolerated no appeals to their decisions. "You have come seeking admission to the Interstellar Defense Coalition," said, their voice resonating through the chamber. "You represent the finest your species have to offer. Today, we measure your potential. Tomorrow, we test your limits. Only the worthy will earn their place among us." The assessments began. Each candidate stepped forward in turn to undergo a series of measurements and tests. Machines scanned their bodies, analyzing muscle density, bone strength, neural processing speed, and a dozen other metrics Myra barely understood. Psionic potential was measured through contact with a crystalline artifact that glowed brighter or dimmer depending on the candidate's mental gifts. Myra watched the candidates score impressively in strength and durability. She watched them demonstrate reflexes that the machines could barely track. She watched a candidate reshape their body in real time, growing additional limbs and then reabsorbing them, displaying adaptive capabilities that seemed almost magical. When her turn came, she walked to the assessment platform with her head held high. She would not show fear. She would not show doubt. Whatever the machines measured, she would face the results with dignity. The scans were thorough and impersonal. Myra stood still while devices hummed around her, recording every aspect of her physical being. She touched the psionic crystal and felt nothing, watching it remain completely dark. She performed the strength tests and endurance tests, giving everything she had, knowing it would not be enough. The results appeared on the central display for all to see. Myra Human Earth. Strength 12th percentile. Speed 34th percentile. Durability 8th percentile. Psionic potential none detected. Neural processing 67th percentile. Endurance 71st percentile. Overall ranking 47th of 47. Dead last. A murmur ran through the assembled observers. Myra heard clicks and whistles and harmonic tones that her translator rendered as variations of amusement and pity. She stood perfectly still, her face carefully blank, and waited for the ceremony to continue. A young name stepped forward from the group of candidates. He had ranked third overall, behind only two others of his species. His deep voice carried easily through the chamber. "Is this what humanity offers? This small, weak creature with no gifts and no potential?" He turned to address the observers, his four arms spread wide in a gesture of disbelief. "Earth should surrender its coalition seat rather than insult us all with this pretense of competition." Myra felt the words like physical blows, but she did not react. She had learned long ago that showing pain only encouraged those who wished to cause it. High Assessor raised one slender hand for silence. "The rankings reflect measured potential. The trials will reveal true capability. All candidates who meet the minimum requirements may compete." Those four eyes turned to Myra. "The human meets the minimum requirements." The ceremony concluded with the announcement of the first trial, scheduled for the following day. Candidates were dismissed to their quarters to rest and prepare. Myra walked through the corridors alone, ignoring the looks and whispers that followed her. Her quarters were small, barely large enough for a sleeping platform and a basic hygiene unit. She sat on the edge of the platform and allowed herself one moment of weakness, pressing her hands against her face and breathing deeply until the urge to cry had passed. Then she pulled up the trial protocols on her communicator and began to read. The first trial was a test of combat skills, fought in simulated environments against artificial opponents. The second trial was something called the Proving Grounds, where candidates retrieved designated objects and carried them to finish points. The details were vague, suggesting that the specific challenges varied based on candidate ranking and species capabilities. Myra read about previous trials, searching for patterns and precedents. She found records of human candidates who had competed in past cycles, studying their performances and their failures. Most had been eliminated in the first or second trial. The four who had succeeded had done so through exceptional circumstances that were unlikely to repeat. She read until her eyes burned and her head ached. Then she slept, dreaming of vast corridors and ancient machines, and the laughter of beings who thought she did not belong. Morning came too quickly. Myra dressed in her competition uniform, a simple gray suit that fit poorly because it had been designed for Commander Wei's larger frame. She looked at herself in the reflective surface of the hygiene unit and saw a tired young woman with calloused hands and worried eyes. "You're here," she told her reflection. "That's something. Now do something with it." The first trial eliminated 12 candidates. Myra survived barely through a combination of caution and luck that left her exhausted and bruised. Her ranking did not improve, but it did not matter. She had advanced to the second trial. That night, she read about the Proving Grounds until she had memorized every available detail. Something about the descriptions troubled her, but she could not identify what until she finally fell asleep. The Proving Grounds waited. The arena was older than anything Myra had ever seen. Its walls rose in sweeping curves that seemed to defy normal architecture, covered in symbols and patterns that no living species could fully translate. The original builders of Prime had constructed this place for purposes long forgotten, and they had adapted it for their trials without truly understanding everything it contained. Myra stood at her designated starting position, one of 35 remaining candidates arranged in a wide circle around a central platform. The 12 who had failed the first trial were gone, sent home to their worlds with nothing but the memory of their defeat. The 35 who remained would face the Proving Grounds, and more would fall. High Assessor floated above the arena on a platform of light, their 4 eyes surveying the candidates below. When they spoke, their voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Before you lies the legacy of the builders. Each of you has been assigned an object to retrieve from the central platform. You will carry your object to your designated finish point. The trial ends when you cross that line or when you surrender. There is no time limit. There is no assistance. Begin when ready." The other candidates moved immediately, racing toward the platform with varying degrees of speed and confidence. Myra walked. There was no point in running when she could not outpace anyone here. She would save her energy for whatever challenge awaited. The platform held a strange collection of objects. Some were clearly weapons, blades and staffs and devices that hummed with contained energy. Others were containers of various sizes, sealed boxes and spheres that might hold anything. A few were stranger still, artifacts that easy categorization. Myra found her assigned object and stopped. It was a hammer, a massive, ancient hammer with a head the size of her torso and a handle wrapped in material that felt like leather, but was certainly something else entirely. Symbols covered its surface, the same indecipherable marks that decorated the arena walls. A small tag attached to the handle displayed her name and designation. She reached down and gripped the handle. The hammer did not move. Myra adjusted her stance, bent her knees, and pulled with all her strength. The hammer trembled slightly but remained firmly fixed to the platform. She felt the resistance in her arms, her back, her legs, a weight that seemed to increase the harder she pulled. Gravity manipulation. She recognized the effect from her years working in variable gravity environments. The hammer was not simply heavy. Something was actively increasing its effective mass, fighting against any attempt to lift it. Around her, other candidates were already moving toward their finish points. The who had mocked her carried a massive stone sphere across his shoulders with apparent ease. A flowed past her, cradling a glowing cube in their elegant hands. I had simply absorbed their assigned object into their crystalline body and was rolling toward their destination. Myra heard laughter. She looked up and saw watching her, his small eyes bright with amusement. "The hammer of," he called out. "The eliminators assigned you the hammer. How fitting for the lowest ranked." She ignored him and focused on the problem. The hammer's weight was not constant. She could feel it pulsing, increasing and decreasing in subtle waves. The gravity field was not static but dynamic, cycling through patterns that she was only beginning to recognize. Her first instinct was to fight it, to pull harder during the lighter moments and rest during the heavier ones. She tried this approach and managed to lift the hammer perhaps 3 centimeters before the weight became unbearable and she had to release it. Other candidates continued past her. Some stopped to watch, curious about the human struggle. A few offered comments that her translator rendered as variations of hopeless and waste of time. Myra did not respond. She was too busy thinking. The gravity field pulsed. She counted the rhythm, feeling it through her grip on the handle. There was a pattern there, a regularity that suggested deliberate design rather than random fluctuation. The builders had created this artifact with purpose. Everything they made had purpose. She thought about the asteroid mining work she had done all her life. She thought about the way mass behaved in variable gravity, how objects could be moved that seemed immovable if you understood the physics involved. She thought about resonance frequencies and harmonic motion, concepts she had learned from her father when she was barely tall enough to reach the drill controls. The hammer pulsed. Myra began to rock it gently, matching the rhythm of the gravity field rather than fighting against it. The motion was tiny at first, barely perceptible, but she felt the resistance decrease slightly during the lighter phases. A candidate stopped to observe. "What is she doing?" "Failing slowly instead of quickly," someone answered. "Humans lack the wisdom to accept defeat." Myra kept rocking the hammer. She found the resonance point the moment when her motion aligned perfectly with the gravity pulse. The hammer lifted a centimeter, then 2, then 5. The arena grew quieter. More candidates stopped to watch. Even those who had already retrieved their objects paused near their finish points, curious about the spectacle unfolding on the central platform. Myra's arms burned. Her back screamed with effort. She felt her heartbeat pounding in her temples, felt sweat running down her face and dripping onto the ancient stone beneath her feet. The hammer rose to knee height, then waist height, fighting her every centimeter of the way. She took a step. The weight shifted, threatening to pull her off balance, but she adjusted and held firm. Another step. Another. The finish point was 50 meters away, an eternity at this pace. High Assessor descended on their platform of light, coming close enough to observe the human's technique. Those 4 eyes studied her with an expression that might have been surprise or might have been something else entirely. 20 minutes passed. Myra continued walking, one agonizing step at a time. Her vision had narrowed to a tunnel focused on the finish line. She could no longer feel her arms as separate parts of her body. They had become simply extensions of the hammer, tools for the single purpose of forward motion. 30 minutes. 40. The other candidates had finished long ago, but none had left the arena. They watched in silence as the lowest-ranked competitor carried an object that should have been impossible to move. Stood near his own finish point, his stone sphere forgotten at his feet. His expression had changed from amusement to something harder to read. He did not speak, did not mock, simply watched. 50 minutes. Myra was 10 meters from the finish line. Her legs shook with every step. Her breathing came in ragged gasps. The hammer seemed to weigh more with every passing second, as if the artifact itself was determined to defeat her. She thought about her father, watching the stars from the observation deck of the steady hand. She thought about her mother, who had died when Myra was 12, crushed by a shifting asteroid during a routine survey mission. She thought about Earth, billions of people who would never know her name but whose place in the galaxy might depend on what she did in the next few minutes. 5 meters. Her foot slipped, and for one terrible moment she thought she would fall. But she caught herself, adjusted her grip, and kept moving. 3 meters. The silence in the arena was absolute. Not even the observers in the upper tiers made a sound. 1 meter. The gravity field pulsed one final time, a massive surge that nearly drove her to her knees. But she had felt it coming, had learned to anticipate the rhythm, and she pushed through it with everything she had left. Myra crossed the finish line and released the hammer. It fell like a dying star, cratering the ancient stone platform with an impact that shook the entire arena. Myra collapsed beside it, her chest heaving, her body trembling with exhaustion. She could not stand. She could barely breathe, but she had finished. The arena erupted. She heard cheering and shouting, and sounds that her translator could not render. She heard her name called by voices she did not recognize. She felt hands helping her up, supporting her weight when her legs refused to cooperate. High Assessor floated before her, those 4 eyes studying her with undisguised interest. The hammer of has not been moved from this platform in 217 years, they said. No candidate has ever carried it to a finish point. You are the first. Myra blinked, trying to process the words through her exhaustion. I did not know that. No, you did not. Tilted their head in a gesture that might have been approval. That may be why you succeeded. She wanted to respond, to say something meaningful about determination or human stubbornness, or any of the things that stories said in moments like this. But her body had reached its limit, and darkness claimed her before she could form the words. She woke in a medical bay with machines humming around her, and a physician monitoring her vital signs. The physician informed her that she had been unconscious for 6 hours, and that she had suffered severe muscle strain, minor bone fractures in both arms, and something called gravitational stress syndrome that would require several days of rest to fully heal. Myra accepted this news with a nod. Then she asked the only question that mattered. Did I advance? The physician's expression was unreadable, but their voice held something that might have been respect. The final trial has been canceled. High Assessor has called an assembly. All candidates are required to attend. They paused. All candidates includes you, human. The assembly chamber was larger than the ranking room, designed to accommodate not just candidates, but representatives from every coalition species. Myra entered on unsteady legs, refusing the support that several beings offered as she made her way to her designated position. The other candidates watched her with expressions that had changed dramatically from the previous day. The contempt was gone. The pity was gone. Something else had replaced them, something that Myra did not have the energy to analyze. Stood nearby, his massive form casting a shadow that engulfed her completely. He did not speak, but he inclined his head in a gesture that she understood as acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. High Assessor floated to the center of the chamber, commanding attention simply by existing. When they spoke, their words carried the weight of 300 years of tradition. The Galactic Assessment Trials have operated under the same protocols since their inception. We measure strength, we measure speed, we measure potential, we rank candidates according to these measurements and design challenges to test those rankings. 4 eyes found Myra in the crowd. We have always assumed that higher rankings indicate greater capability. The human has demonstrated that this assumption is flawed. A murmur ran through the assembly. Myra stood perfectly still, uncertain what was happening. The hammer of was never meant to be lifted. It was placed in the proving grounds as a psychological weapon, designed to break the will of lower-ranked candidates and force early surrenders. The gravity lock was calibrated to exceed the maximum lifting capacity of any known species by a factor of 3. No candidate, regardless of strength or ability, should have been able to move it. Gestured, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed Myra on the platform, beginning her slow process of rocking the hammer. The human did not attempt to overpower the gravity field. She identified its pulse pattern and lifted between the peaks, when the effective mass dropped by fractions of a percent. This required precise timing, sustained effort over nearly 1 hour, and a willingness to endure pain that would have caused most beings to surrender. The display showed Myra's vital signs during the trial, heartbeat, and stress levels that would have indicated imminent death in most species. She should have collapsed. She should have failed. She did neither. Spoke from his position, his deep voice cutting through the silence. She did not use strength. She used a trick. That is not the same as true capability. Turned those 4 eyes on and Myra saw something she had not expected. The ancient was angry. The purpose of the coalition is not to collect the strongest individuals. It is to identify those who will find solutions when strength alone fails. We face enemies who cannot be defeated through force. We encounter problems that cannot be solved through speed or power or psionic ability. His voice rose, filling the chamber with authority that silenced all opposition. The human demonstrated exactly the qualities we need most: adaptation, persistence, the refusal to accept impossible as an answer. The High Assessor turned to address the full assembly. I call for a vote. The trials are suspended. Myra of Earth will be offered immediate admission to the Interstellar Defense Coalition with appointment to the Tactical Division. This position has never been held by a human. Those in favor. The vote was not unanimous. Several representatives voted against, as did a handful of others who seemed unable to accept what had happened. But the majority supported its proposal, and the majority was enough. Myra stood in stunned silence as the results were announced. She had come here expecting elimination in the first trial. She had hoped, at best, to avoid embarrassing herself or her species. Instead, she had been appointed to a position of authority that no human had ever held. Floated before her, extending one slender hand in a gesture of greeting that Myra had only seen in historical records. Welcome to the coalition, Myra. You have earned your place in a way that none of us anticipated. We will be watching your career with great interest. Myra accepted the hand, feeling the cool, dry texture of skin against her own callous palm. Thank you, High Assessor. I hope I can live up to your expectations. You already have. That is why we chose you. Released her hand and turned to address the assembly one final time. The assessment metrics will be revised immediately. We will add a new category that we have never thought to measure. We will call it adaptive persistence under impossible conditions. The human has shown us that this quality may be more valuable than any we have previously tracked. The assembly dispersed slowly, beings of every shape and size filing out of the chamber with much to discuss. Several approached Myra to offer congratulations or simply to look at her more closely, curious about the small creature who had done something impossible. Was the last to approach. He stood before her for a long moment, his 4 arms folded across his massive chest, his small eyes studying her with an intensity that might have been threatening under other circumstances. I was wrong about you, he said finally. About your species, I apologize. Myra looked up at him, this being who had mocked her and dismissed her, and seemed to represent everything that humanity struggled against in this galaxy. You were not entirely wrong, she said. I am small, I am weak. I have no special gifts or abilities, but I grew up in the asteroid belt where the gravity changes with every rock you stand on. I learned to work with mass instead of against it because I had no other choice. And that made you capable of doing what none of us could. That made me capable of trying long after anyone else would have quit. Sometimes that is enough. Consider this for a moment. then extended one massive hand in an unmistakable gesture of respect. "I hope to serve alongside you someday, Myra. I think I could learn much from someone who does not know when to surrender." She took his hand, her fingers tiny against his palm. "I look forward to it." That evening, Myra sat alone in her quarters and composed a message to her family aboard the Steady Hand. She had promised to tell them the results of the trials, whatever those results might be. She kept the message simple, knowing that her father would appreciate brevity over explanation. "The gravity here is different than they expected. Turns out that's an advantage. I am staying. They want me to lead things. I will explain more when I can. Love to everyone." She sent the message and then sat for a while, watching the stars through her small window. Tomorrow she would begin her new life, learning to work alongside beings who had never taken humanity seriously. Tomorrow she would face challenges that she could not yet imagine. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had done something impossible. She had changed the way an ancient civilization thought about capability and worth. She had proven that the qualities that seemed like weaknesses could become strengths under the right circumstances. Somewhere out there, in a galaxy full of beings who were faster and stronger and more powerful than humans would ever be, there was now a place for people like her. People who refused to accept limits. People who found ways to succeed when all logic said they should fail. The stars burned cold and bright beyond her window. Myra watched them until her eyes grew heavy, and then she slept without dreams. She had earned her rest, and tomorrow she would earn something more.